During the course of the 19th and 20th centuries, there was a tendency for information systems in the world to move from word-based systems to number-based systems. In London, for instance, at the beginning of the 19th century, the only ways of describing London were convoluted descriptions of how to get to each street. There were many duplicate street names, and it was a bit of a mess. My own father kept up this tradition well into the 20th century, giving directions on how to get to a place by which pub was on a particular corner. The introduction of a UK-wide postal service in 1840 spurred the Victorians into action. Many postal workers were confused, even though house numbers rather than house names had started to be introduced. But the powers that be saw the thousands of duplicate street names in London, and these started to be addressed by name changes. In 1857, London was divided into 10 postal districts: EC, East Central, WC, West Central, North, Northeast, East, Southeast, South, Southwest, West and Northwest. The South and Northeast sectors were later abolished. 60 years later, in 1917, as a wartime measure to improve efficiency, each postal district was further subdivided into sub-districts, each identified by a number. Similar things happened to the road system in the UK. There were thousands of high streets, thousands of London roads. National navigation was quite difficult. Watling Street, for instance, led from London to Holyhead, but if a driver stopped for lunch in Oswestry, which way out of town led to Holyhead? Was it Willow Street? Shrewsbury Road? Work on road classification began in 1913 by the government's Roads Board. A classification system was created, under which important routes connecting large population centres were designated as Class 1 and roads of lesser importance as Class 2. The definitive list of these roads was published on the 1st of April 1923. In time, this evolved into the A roads and B roads. Shortly after 1923, these numbers started to appear in road atlases and on signs on the roads themselves, making them a tool for motorists. I'm about to set off for a walk from Lancaster Gate to Marble Arch along the Bayswater Road, and this takes us along the route of the Central Line going eastbound. But I'm not finished with all the roads, so let's put the walk in a corner and carry on with the story. According to the 1920s plan, the A roads were designed to be the main roads which connected major centres of the country. The B roads led off the A roads to connect these to villages, and there were C roads, smaller and narrower still, but most of these C numbers didn't survive into modern times. Some did, but not many. At the heart of the new system were two national capitals of London and Edinburgh. From those two, the single-digit A roads headed for the coast, and this series of maps shows the A1 through to the A9, leaving London and Edinburgh for the coast, with apologies to Shetland for moving their islands a bit on the map. These single-digit roads were numbered in a clockwise direction, and this enabled the gloriously logical system of sectors, which allowed a scheme to number all other A and B roads. Since these single-digit roads headed for the coast and were arranged clockwise, the sectors could be as well. So Sector 1 between the A1 and the A2, Sector 2 between the A2 and the A3, Sector 3 between the A3 and the A4, and so on. Roads within a particular sector would begin with the sector number. So in Surrey, A and B roads are numbered with a 2 or a 3, depending on which side of the A3 the road is. Roads in Scotland begin with a 6, 7, 8 or 9, apart from a tiny selection of roads between the A1 and the coast, which begin with a 1. All roads in the southwest of England begin with a 3. If a road crossed sectors, such as the A38 beginning at Land's End but ending in the English Midlands, it took the number of the lowest sector it crossed. There was a bit of logic to the 2-digit A roads as well. The A10, A11, A12 and A13 were all numbered clockwise. The A20 through to the A25 similarly, the A30 and then the A31. And originally the A40 ran west out of the City of London, along Oxford Street to Marble Arch, along the Bayswater Road, Acton, Uxbridge, Oxford, and all the way to Fishguard. Let's now rejoin the Bayswater Road and that walk. As we go full screen again, well, you haven't really missed much. It's been a busy road, the Bayswater Road, and it's been sunny, but it will continue busy and sunny as we carry on this bit. While this street we're crossing is called Brook Street, it's not related to the River Westbourne, which crosses under the Bayswater Road behind us further west. It's actually named after a very small rivulet, which was situated in a boggy field. Bayswater Road, which is our route for the whole of this walk, is the main road running along the northern edge of Hyde Park. And like Oxford Street further east, Bayswater Road follows the course of the old Roman road linking London with Silchester. On this 1800 map, the main road, then known as Uxbridge Road, was still very rural. And the map you're looking at is a combination of two maps, which is why it's a bit weird, but the straight road running along the bottom is Uxbridge Road, well, Bayswater Road, and Hyde Park is to the south of that. If you look closely, there are two pubs along the road. There's the Swan Inn, part of the then Bayswater Tea Gardens, and this was situated beside the still open air River Westbourne. It was a place to go to on a sunny day in the 18th century, and you could just watch the river gambling by under the bridge. And the Crown Inn, also shown, is exactly on the modern location of Lancaster Gate station, which we left earlier. On the far right side of the map is the junction of Bayswater Road and Edgware Road at Marble Arch. Between the Crown Inn and Marble Arch is the St George's Burial Ground, which we'll come to shortly. All of these fields to the north of Bayswater Road would be early in the 19th century to be developed as part of a posh suburb called Tyburnia. The name has fallen out of use now. The fictional upper middle class family in John Galsworth's The Forsyte Saga supposedly lived on the Bayswater Road when it was posh. Chester House, not far up Clarendon Place here, is a house that was designed by the architect Giles Gilbert Scott as his personal residence. Gilbert Scott is famous for lots of stuff around London, but he lived in this house from its completion in 1926 until his death in 1960. It was the recipient, the house that is, not Mr. Gilbert Scott. The house was the recipient of the annual medal for London street architecture of the Royal Institute of British Architects in 1928. As a modern newsagent's business, W.H. Smith is a forever fading brand. But William Henry Smith, he lived at 12 Hyde Park Street, just here. And he made his fortune from bookstalls at railway stations. These proved to be an especially successful endeavour, and this is how his empire started. Albion Street was laid out over the local Pytal fields in the 1820s. Let's go back to look at the part of the map as the spelling of these two fields isn't half odd. Pytal. You see this word written on all sorts of old maps, and if like me you say, what does that mean? Well, it just means a small field. Oranienhaven here was a society in London during the Second World War. At the initiative of Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, the club was intended as a refuge for the approximately 1700 Dutch who had fled over the North Sea as the Nazis advanced. They'd be accommodated here, given food, clothing and some pocket money to tide them over. Whenever Queen Wilhelmina, who was exiled in London herself, came to the club for tea, all the liquor bottles were hidden, but apparently really it was just a drinking club. There was not a lot to do if you were exiled in London as a Dutch person, and many just turned to drink to pass the time. St George's Field served as a burial ground from 1763 and was later repurposed for archery games and allotments before its closure in 1854. I should have snuck in that gate while no one was paying attention. Anyway, the land belonged to St George's Church in Hanover Square until 1967, when it was sold to developers who preserved several of the original tombstones. And the development now consists of flats designed in the early 1970s. It's a complex of about 300 flats, nestled apparently within 2 acres of woodland gardens, but you don't get to see it if you don't live there. In this building, the Tyburn nuns, more formally named the Adorers of the Sacred Heart of Jesus of Montmartre, this is a Catholic congregation of Benedictine nuns, and it was originally founded in Paris, but was obliged to find a new mother house due to French legislation in 1901. So they came to London, and the nuns here practice the perpetual adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, and they maintain a shrine dedicated to the Catholic martyrs of the English Reformation. The reason this site was chosen was because it was close to the location of the Tyburn tree where people got hung, and 105 Catholic martyrs were executed there for their faith between 1535 and 1681. If you ask very nicely, you can visit. It's one of the lesser known sites of London. Passing Stanhope Place here, well, the Tyburnia district I mentioned earlier formed the centrepiece of an 1824 master plan by Samuel Pepys Cockerell. That's a different Samuel Pepys from the diarist. He was a Samuel Pepys with a cockerel on the end. And he planned to redevelop the historic lands of the Bishop of London, known as the Tyburn Estate, and he planned a residential estate to rival the recently formed Belgravia. It was the first part of Paddington to be developed. The area was laid out in the early 1800s, when grand squares and cream stuccoed terraces started to fill the acres between Paddington Station and Hyde Park. However, the plans were never realised in full, and the whole area lost its name and just gets called either Bayswater or Paddington these days. One thing I didn't say in the earlier road section was that the A14 no longer runs along Bayswater Road. When the Westway flyover was built in 1969, part of the A40 was forced up the A5 here along Edgware Road, and then it led west along the Westway and eventually along the Western Avenue and out towards Buckinghamshire. We're coming up to Marble Arch itself, but at time of walking, this is all under tarpaulin and you can't see any of it. But here's the station which ends this walk. See you on the next one.